Right, so I've got a great little chat with you today, talking to Ann Lewins, who, as I'm sure many of you know, was the forefront of the CAQDAS Networking Project for many, many years. And she was a colleague of mine. We worked together very closely for more than a decade, almost 15 years actually, until she retired, since which we haven't seen each other as often as we'd like, unfortunately. So this was a great opportunity to get together, sit down on the sofa and have a chat, have a reminiscence about days gone by, and how Anne got into the field of CAQDAS and her thoughts about the future and the past too. So it's a slightly longer one than normal. So yeah, sit down, enjoy it. All right, so I want to go right back to the beginning and how it all started for you in terms of CAQDAS. So
Right.
you were doing a PhD in history at the time, weren't you?
It was sort of more politics, really. I mean, it was. I think that was my problem with my PhD is I couldn't decide. I couldn't keep it in the historical sense. It kept flashing up to the present, but it was all about. It was all about how the Labour Party changed direction towards Europe, and I just couldn't keep the historical context. Also, I was doing it part time, so eventually it fell by the wayside slightly. It was difficult to sustain because I was trying to earn a living and all that sort of thing.
And that's how you met Ray. Ray was your supervisor, Ray?
No, he wasn't my supervisor, but he was an occasional advisor because I was attending the odd tutorial or lecture at Royal Holloway, where I was based. And So he definitely had an input on the methodology side, and that was quite helpful because I was doing interviews with local politicians quite a lot, and so he was quite helpful in that respect.
So how did the enculturation into CAQDAS evolve then?
Well, I sort of uh, uh, I think it was Ray who told me it was coming up. He I've forgotten what the word is. He sort of abdicated from the interview panel while I was being interviewed, for the sake of fairness. So he had no influence. Although obviously I wouldn't have heard about it if it hadn't been for Ray. And I went along to Surrey University to be interviewed by Nigel, amongst other people, and I think I got the job not because of my qualifications, although I did get quite a good degree at Royal Holloway. I think it was because I'd run a business with my husband. He died at the age of 40, and we supplied basically equipment for marathons, and we travelled all over the country doing the timing for marathons and fun runs and all sorts of things. And when he died, well, before he died, we were basically doing everything. We were putting up gantries, we were doing the paperwork, we were selling the business, we were promoting the business, all that sort of thing. So I was very, a typical sole proprietor set of skills. And I think they saw the CAQDAS Networking Project, which was completely their idea, as going down that sort of route. It was starting from nothing and needed to build up an audience and people who were interested. And it was such early days for the whole genre of software for qualitative data analysis that I think they were feeling their way as well. So I think when they came across someone who seemed to have all the skills for setting things up, setting a business up, I think that sort of appealed to them.
And that's what you actually did. I mean,
yes,
pretty much
yeah,
single-handedly. I mean, they were directing things, advising and everything, but you were the one who was doing the day-to-day.
Yes, I think the directing and advising took a little while. when I first arrived in the Department of Sociology, I was just completely bemused by the whole academic setup. You know, I was a complete fish out of water. I didn't know who to refer to or who to ask about things. I didn't know how things worked. I didn't know about email. I certainly didn't know about the software. I didn't know much about sociology. So I was really starting from the bottom. It was a big learning curve. But actually, I think in the long term, as I gradually started to put on courses, mostly day courses, I think that helped me because I saw what other people had problems with. And so, and whenever I taught myself a software package from scratch, you have to start from a very low level because they're all so different. Each version can be quite different, actually. So starting from the bottom and building your handouts, as it were, as part of that learning curve, made you realize what people would have a problem with. If I had a problem, then other people were going to have a problem with it. So I think that was sort of quite useful.
Yeah, it makes me think about those handouts, actually. So I remember when I came in, we'll talk about that a bit later on, but the handouts were hard work to create and lots of time, weren't they?
Yes.
But you're right, you know, writing those handouts, writing those instructions really helped me, I remember, to learn the software.
Yes.
because you have to know it intimately to know how to write the instruction. And at those times, the software manuals were really technical, weren't they? They weren't really so useful in terms of why you might do something.
And you really wanted to give them something that supported what they'd done in a workshop, and putting software packages together in terms of how they become useful to a researcher. That's the sort of the bit that we tried to get over in those handouts, don't you think? The sort of building to the point where, having done all that on one side of your work, you then combined it with another dimension of work, maybe sociodemographics or something like that. And then you combined it with the query tool and you brought them all together to do a bit more inquiry and interrogation. And I think those handouts, detailed, probably far too detailed as they were, and they were very well illustrated, I thought.
Lots of arrows.
Yes, lots of arrows.
I used to enjoy doing them, though, although it took ages to do, especially the new ones, like you say, like learning the new software. That was a big task.
Yeah.
So I remember, you know, when there was a new software, we were talking before we started about Walrus, and I remember, you know, when that came out in, I think 2002 or something, like having to learn that from scratch, and that was very different from the others.
Oh, it was. And
QDA Minor. Do you remember that?
In fact, that was the first glimmer of AI, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Walrus.
absolutely.
I mean, Ed Brent was really quite ahead of his game, wasn't he? In terms of yes. Anyway,
super clever. No, I was just saying, you know, that although it was a challenge producing that documentation, those handouts that went with our workshops, it was also, I enjoyed doing it, like the creative side of making them.
It was a bit creative, wasn't it?
Look nice.
Yes,
I took quite a lot of pride in how they looked, but also I couldn't have learnt the software to the level of detail that I did if I hadn't have created those. I don't think. No. Especially in the early days.
No. I think in the very early days, I was very formulaic in the way. I owe a lot to Lynn Richards. I think I joined the CAQDAS Networking Project in May 1994, and the very first presentation or day course I attended myself was Lynn Richards teaching nudist.
So she came over here, did she?
Yes. She was visiting. I think they were sort of touring around a bit and doing various things, and she and Tom came together, and I sat in on her day course, and I was absolutely blown away. But I don't think I grasped some of the essentials. So I went away with some quite, erroneous ideas of how to make it work. And so for my first couple of workshops that I delivered, following that, I don't think I did it very well at all. And so, you know, my teaching gradually got better. I had a lot of help too from Susanna Fries, because I quite quickly started teaching Atlas TI, and she was far more of an expert at Atlas TI than I was. She came up from Brighton. She was doing I think she was doing a postgraduate research degree at Brighton. I might have that wrong, at Sussex University. And she came up for all my Atlas TI workshops, and I learned an awful lot from her. And I think, you know, gradually I began to feel confident in my own skin that I was doing things right. But those early workshops, we had that airless lab. Do you remember?
We've still got it.
Have you?
Yeah.
But we had to talk. We talked all day, basically. There was very little leaving them alone on their own. So at the end of the day, I would go home thinking I'd got flu, because the air in that lab was so awful. And I feel so sorry in retrospect for the people that used to come and do the courses. But everybody seemed to go away quite happy. And yes.
So how many people would come on those early workshops? I mean, how popular were the programs at that time?
I think it was amazing how, I mean, even in the quite early days, before you joined, I ran a very vigorous program of events, probably, I can't remember now, probably about 20 or 30 workshops a year.
Training workshops.
One-day workshops, and never had any trouble filling them. Always put a ceiling on how many, because I felt, you know, you just couldn't manage more than about 15 and probably that lab, you know, would have been utterly insufferable if I tried to pack sort of 20 or 30 people into the lab.
So you were doing 15 on your own at that time, unless you had Susanna coming up, or because it wasn't for all of the sessions that she would come up.
No, it was only for the Atlas TI sessions. And, you know, eventually she stopped doing that anyway, because I didn't sort of need her. And she was very busy with her work herself. But of course, we stayed in contact throughout my career, actually. So, yes, I can't really remember whether I put a ceiling on numbers, but I became even more aware later on that the more you had, the less you could offer on an individual basis. I mean, that's just common sense, isn't it? It's sort of yes, and the more teaching I did, I think the more I realised that you have to leave the students alone for a bit of time, you know, whereas to start with, I wouldn't leave them alone. You know, I was telling them step by step what to do, and but I think that was more a pressure of time and making sure that eventually they went away with the right message. So, you know, I didn't feel I could leave anybody alone for too long. But you know, your teaching changes over time, doesn't it? And you get better at it. And I think when you joined, that was another sort of learning point, really. It was another point at which my teaching changed, because I had help, you know, and that made a huge difference.
We'll talk about that in a sec, but before we do, you've mentioned Nudist and Atlas TI already, but what were the other programs that you were teaching in those early days? So the ethnograph would have been...
Yes, John Seidel was one of the really early influences on me, and Susanna Fries actually was very involved in the ethnograph, and so she was good at the ethnograph and helping support it. I don't think I ran many workshops from the ethnograph, because at that point in 1994, everything was changing to Windows, and Nudist, the version of Nudist that I saw was a Windows version. They also had a Mac version at that stage. Atlas TI wasn't a Windows version, but it was a Windows type software. So it sort of fitted into...
What does that mean?
Well, it's difficult to explain, because I probably don't know the technology of it, but it worked on a different basis. John Seidel's was definitely a sort of, you could see it was a DOS type of structure behind it, whereas Thomas Muir had done something rather different with Atlas TI. And Atlas TI has sort of that also changed quite a lot when it actually became a Windows package, but it still had the look of the old software, whereas the ethnograph never quite made it into the Windows format. So that sort of got left a bit behindhand. People were expecting a sort of easier, more fluid format of Windows quite quickly. Things change.
Yeah. Well, things change really quickly, don't they, when you think back?
Yes.
So, and then what about hyper research?
Yes, that was basically a Mac package originally, although they created a Windows version. And that was, I can't remember the name of
Charlene.
Yes, oh yeah, Charlene Hesbiber.
And do
Yes, that was very interesting because it had this hypothesis tester, which was rather an interesting tool. But that again rather subsided in UK, and the demand for courses on that software rather fell away. And I think one of the problems we sort of faced in the CAQDAS Networking Project is we had no commercial links whatsoever, and that was, part of our mission statement. But inevitably, we answered demand, which sort of reinforced the prominence of certain software packages. And I think maybe we were slightly uncomfortable with that. And for that reason, we used to throw very regular free seminars showcasing lots of other softwares.
Yes.
But we did tend to concentrate most of our training offerings on Nudist, and then NVivo, of course, Atlas TI, Max QDA. What else did we do?
Well, we did lots of different things over the years and still do now. So, and that issue that you raise about demand is still something, we have two sides of what we're trying to do, isn't it? It's meeting the demand and building capacity in the tools that people want to use, but then sort of, I guess, before that, raising awareness about what's out there. So we're still doing quite a lot of support for researchers about choosing tools. So lots of people come to Sarah and myself now saying, I've got this kind of project and I've got some money in my bids, what's the most appropriate tool? And that's something that was always part of the whole idea of the project is, not to promote a particular tools over any others, but to raise awareness, but then also to fulfill that demand from a capacity building. And I think you're right that the balance between those two things has always been something that we've been very conscious about. I think
we've really tried to address it in our in our free seminars and also those software planning seminars we used to do to help people choose. We really tried hard to spread the base of the triangle.
All right, so that's a little bit about the beginnings. You mentioned me joining, which I think was, formally 1998.
I remember the moment.
Do you?
Yes, I do. I can remember I'd not long moved offices, and I was on the way out of the department. I was near the exit door, and you and a chap, it might have been Jason, actually.
No, it wasn't Jason, because it was when I was doing my master's and I didn't meet him until I was doing my PhD.
Anyway, you paused by my door because I didn't have a huge amount to do with the master's students, but you paused by my door. I didn't know you from Adam. And you said, I don't suppose I could have a free version of Nudist, could I, to do my research with, to analyse my data with. And basically, I gave you rather short shrift.
You said no.
I said no, probably in quite a strident voice.
Yeah.
Because when I think back on that now, I mean, I said no because our license didn't cover giving students and Tom, Dick, and Harry free licenses here, there, and everywhere. We tried to stick to the letter of the law about licenses, but thinking about it now and knowing how involved we got, quite quickly after that, I've been thinking I could have stretched a point for her. And instead of which you did the whole of your...
I did my master's dissertation analysis over a bank holiday weekend without turning off my computer.
Because that's what you had to do, of course, in those days, with a demo version.
With the demo version of Nudist, I think it was Nudist 4 at the time, because
that's some
that was the one that because before I stood by your door, I remember it as well. I don't know who I was with at the time, but it must have been one of the other students. But anyway, you'd done a session on the master's course, like an hour overview or something before that, maybe the day before, or I don't know. So that's how I knew about it. And I'd done my very first qualitative project for my undergraduate, with highlighter pens and bits of paper all over the place. And then when you came and did that, I think it was just an hour. I think you took over one of Nigel Fielding's field methods things, which I then did many years later, and Sarah now does the same thing still on field methods course.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I remember thinking, oh, wow, that's going to be so much easier. And then you said no. So then I thought, oh, blimey, what am I going to do? So I looked at the demo, and the demo was fully functional. You just couldn't save anything. But you just couldn't save anything. So I just thought, oh, well, I just won't turn my computer off. But it was super stressful because I was really, in those days, the computers weren't so reliable.
No.
But I did lots of coding, and then I printed out what I'd coded, and then carried on with that. And I did the whole thing in a bank holiday weekend over 3 days.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. And I can't remember then, how did we move on to you getting involved
that's
more?
A good question.
Was it because I was so gobsmacked at your achievement that I said, do you want to come along and...
Well, I must have told you that at some point. I did get a prize for my dissertation. I think I was the first master student who'd used software in the department. So I think the fact that I asked for it made you think, oh, somebody's actually going to use it in there. So that might have been
I think I did ask you, didn't I, if you wanted to assist me in the workshops.
But I wouldn't have been doing that when I was doing my master's.
It was afterwards.
Yeah.
Did you sign up for a PhD?
Yeah, I got.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, so you were sort of hanging around and
I was doing important work
and needing employment. So the odd day's pay would have come in handy.
That's right, and that's how it started. So and at that time, so that would have been 4 years after the project started. It was obviously taking on momentum, and
and we never looked back after that, really, because you became more and more embedded in the project, and of course, the pressure was always on us in the CAQDAS Networking Project, because we had to get funding every couple of years, sometimes every couple of 18 months. But one of our funding projects actually got you included on the project, and that's when you became a proper employee of the University of Surrey. So
that's right, that was 2002.
Oh, was it?
So I think between 1998 and 2002, I was just ad hoc when you needed help.
Yes,
I would come and I'd get paid. I don't know. Did you pay me well? You must have paid me all right. Otherwise I wouldn't.
I'm sure it was a lot for those days.
It probably would have been a lot for me, because I was a student and I wasn't.
Probably was peanuts, actually. And
I can't remember how much it was. No. Anyway, I used to love doing those teachings together. So I remember the very first time I went and did a session completely on my own somewhere else. So do you remember you must have been doing that right from the beginning as well, going elsewhere.
We were both part-time, very part-time.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the very first place I went to do one on my own, I can't remember exactly when it was. I was living in Brighton at the time, so it was probably, I was still doing my PhD. So it was probably before I got the funding in 2000. Anyway, I'm not sure exactly when it was, but it was at the University of Cambridge. And I was so nervous beforehand. I remember all of the over preparation ideas and thinking, it's the University of Cambridge, and I was completely overwhelmed.
Was it the education department?
It might have been
that one.
Maybe it was one of the ones that you
yes.
I was so
that was very hard work because they crammed about 30 or 40 people into that,
and it was in a sort of cell. Well, it wasn't a cellar, but a basement. That's
right. Yes.
Yeah, I remember that really well.
Mm.
But when we talked together, that was always really good fun.
Yes, it was. And there was lots of I think we both learned from each other. Although, it was always a joy to me to be able to put you right on something.
Well, that's the thing about software, isn't it? Is like there's different ways of doing things.
Yes. Oh, is there, Christina?
Yeah, there is. Various ways of doing things. Yeah. But we used to chat about it afterwards, about how it had gone. I remember sitting in that lab after
they're very good, aren't they? They're very good, those chats afterwards.
Yeah.
Because they stick in your mind, and at the time, while you're teaching, you're so busy teaching but the chats afterwards were, and the glasses of wine probably, were quite instructive. Yeah. And helped to gel the things that we needed to do better, or
So earlier you said about the first few times you taught, and how you didn't give the students or the participants very much time to sort of experiment. I remember being really worried about being asked a question that I didn't know the answer to. So how do I do this, or what does that button do? There were always things I wasn't really. So one of the reasons that I think I was in the beginning quite didactic in my teaching was to not give there any space for anybody to ask me something.
You wanted them to. You wanted to know what
was going on.
Yes, you had to get the result you were aiming at, didn't you? So yes.
But now I love being asked questions I don't know, because I think from a teaching and learning point of view, they get so much more out of realizing that there's different ways of doing things, but also that there's always something new to know, and you can't, however long you've known a program, there's always a slightly different way of doing something. And so I love it now. When it happened the other day, actually, I was doing an online session for IMMR, Institute for Mixed Methods Research, with Michelle Salmona. Do you remember her?
Yes, I remember the name.
It was a couple of evenings ago, actually, and at the end in the feedback somebody said, "Oh, I loved it when you made a mistake, Christina, and you were teaching us something and then you did it wrong, and then that made me realize, oh, it's okay to make a mistake." And I think that's a really important thing that I didn't have when I didn't have the confidence in myself as a teacher or the software itself. So at the beginning, I think you must have been similar, right? Learning the software and learning about how to do research at the same time as I was teaching those things. That was a big learning curve. And as I became more confident in both those things, then the way I started to teach was very, very different, I think.
Yeah.
I still like teaching together. So most of my teaching I do on my own these days, unfortunately. But Sarah and we intentionally schedule several sessions a year, just because, like you say, you learn so much from how the other person does it.
Yes. I've only ever taught once with Sarah, but it was brilliant. She's such a good teacher. So I know exactly what you mean.
So what have we done over the years? You've mentioned a few things, but we've done some conferences as well. Do you remember that first conference? So you weren't there at the 1990, the very, very first CAQDAS conference. Neither of us
at Royal Holloway.
Well, no, the 1989.
Oh, the 1989 one, where it all started.
Where it all started.
Yes.
Neither of us were there. But the first one that we organised was 2007 at Royal Holloway, when we brought together, for the second time ever, I guess it would have been by then, developers of different programs.
That's right.
And teachers of software.
Yes. No, that was good. The showers were terrible.
The showers.
I remember having to field lots and lots of
people complaining about the showers.
Complaints about the showers. I know, because I had a room there, and it was pretty awful. But it was a great conference. It was
remember
it was
this talk about
wonderful
the
seeing
shower.
all those developers come together, because we were used to meeting up with the developers on a frequent basis, especially when they had a new version too. But it was wonderful seeing them all together, and
And I've always thought, and still now, the fact that they can come together as competitors and debate the issues and talk constructively about methods and tools. I think it's an amazing thing to observe. And I think I feel quite privileged to be able to have been able to have enabled that over the years.
Yes.
And it's always been like that, hasn't it? I mean,
well, I think we helped it happen, though, didn't we? Without blowing our own trumpets. I do think we provided, although I suppose they probably got together at other qualitative conferences. I do think we sort of created a platform where they could come together, but I think also we might have made things slightly harder for them in terms of the fact that we'd sort of created this arena where they were getting more exposure, but their competitors were also getting more exposure. And I think, I often think it was great for them, us holding all those courses, but they had to be aware at the same time that we were holding all those courses for other softwares. So and there's always a slight, anxiety about that aspect. But anyway.
Yeah, but we did it, didn't we? And they were always really successful, those conferences, I think.
They were great. Yes. And like all conferences, they were sort of good fun as well as hard work. But very good for the field, I think, very good for the field of qualitative data analysis and, the computer-assisted side of that.
I really enjoyed the Petra Kutcher sessions that we did at the 2014 conference. That was an idea that I got from Susanna Friese as well. So Petra Kutcher is when you have, I think you get 6 minutes or something and 20 slides, and the slides just move every 20 seconds. Do you remember?
Those. I remember those. That was quite novel to me. I hadn't seen that before.
So they all got the same question,
yes.
each developer, and I think maybe 8 developers did it, and they had to speak to the same question.
Yeah.
So they were able to showcase, I think it was, what was the actual question for that conference? I've done it a couple of times, but that one was something like, what has X, your software, done for methods or something? And so it was an opportunity for them to showcase what their tool does, but they had to do it in a methodological context. It was super interesting
context. Yes,
I must have those videos somewhere to look back. I did something similar. So before Christmas, we organised this symposium on AI and qualitative research with the Social Research Association, and we did something similar then when we asked some developers to talk to the same question. It wasn't Petra Kutcher, so it wasn't like moving the slides. It was really good. Yeah, it was interesting. So it was I was quite pleased with the balance between the developers talking about AI and how different developers conceptualize what AI is and what it should be, and then also differences in how they've implemented different forms of AI into the tool. So you mentioned Walrus earlier as being sort of the earliest version of the sort of machine learning capabilities. So in Walrus, you could select some text and it would suggest codes to you, and then you could tell it whether you agreed with those codes or not, and it would learn. That was 2002, a long time ago. So that was really great. And then we had some researchers talk about how they'd been using AI for qualitative research in very, very different contexts. So Ipsos, and then David Morgan. Lots. And you should watch the videos. They're out online.
Yes, I meant to, but somehow when you retire, your life gets so busy. You don't have time to do everything. But I do, because I'm still on LinkedIn, I do look at quite a lot of stuff that comes up there, but I don't always follow it up properly. So I really must do, because I I feel the need to bring myself up to date on AI a bit.
Yeah, well, there's lots to come up to date with, and it's
gosh.
changing all the time.
Oh
So
gosh,
keep
yeah,
yourself on your
yeah.
toes. Anyway, going back to conference presentations, I remember, I think it was at one of the Durham conferences.
Oh yes,
when you did an
yes.
amazing
The
presentation.
teamwork under pressure
Yeah.
Project. That was a really interesting project, and it was run by Graham Gibbs, who was one of our great friends of the CAQDAS Networking Project, and he wrote a seminal book on using Nudist, and I think he updated it to NVivo, didn't he?
Yeah, he did.
And his researcher, full-time researcher, also based at Huddersfield, was Celia Taylor. And it was all about teamwork and the pitfalls of teamwork in the context of using CAQDAS programs. And we Celia was such a sport. She really was. But this we one of the things we did, and I think I wanted it to happen. Celia she hadn't been in the qualitative data analysis field, certainly not the social data analysis field, for very long. I think she'd come from the drama field, actually. We wanted her to fall into some of the pitfalls that can occur when you're coding a document, for instance, or just being an individual within a team, working away. She coded the data. The data was conversations with researchers about their use of software, basically, and what they'd found worked for them, what didn't, what problems they encountered, that sort of thing. And so we said to Celia, just do the coding as you see fit.
And you didn't give her much guidance?
No. I mean, you know, maybe she did a bit of reading, but well, obviously she probably did, but in terms of the mechanics of coding schemes, there wasn't a great deal of work out there about how to structure a coding scheme, or you know, how to, and the natural thing was to think of it hierarchically, to think of a coding scheme hierarchically. And she was using NVivo, and she became, you know, very good at using NVivo. And eventually, when I got together with her coding scheme, I realized the problem. It was enormous.
The number of codes?
The number of codes. It was very, very hierarchical, but hierarchical in a vertical sense. So she'd coded very thoroughly and very exhaustively all the concepts and issues and things that she'd discovered in the data, but had divided the occurrence of those things and concepts and attitudes and emotions and all those things into a separate hierarchy for each sociodemographic for each sociodemographic group. So she would do all that coding underneath, let's say, males, and then she would do all the same coding under females, and then all the same coding under 18 to 20-year-olds, or whatever the grouping was. So the hierarchy was absolutely enormous, and there was a lot of repetition of coding underneath all of these. So that's the extreme of what a vertical coding schema can end up like, unless, and part of that is not being super confident about how the software can fix that problem later on.
Not understanding what you can do later once you've done coding.
It's as it were, you're trying to do all the analysis in the coding scheme. You're trying to almost write up each group in the coding scheme, and that's it's one way to go, but it's often not a great way to go.
It's quite common, though. I mean,
it is quite common, and it's often what we used to deal with when we provided project-specific support in our 2-day courses, isn't it?
Yeah.
And also around the country when we were teaching, research projects.
Yeah.
But when we printed off the she exported the coding scheme into Excel, and we printed it off, and it was like reams of wallpaper. And we presented the whole project at the Durham conference. What year was it?
Oh, that we went to a few. I think there were two
It
or
was
three.
the
Definitely.
NVivo Durham conference.
Yeah.
Were there two conferences
There were
up in
definitely
Durham?
two, but maybe
Anyway,
three.
I can't remember which one it was. It must have been.
I think it was the second, not the first one we went to.
Yes. We presented, the substantive aspects of the project and the analysis and the research, and then as a bit of a jokey visual aid, we wrapped Celia up in her coding schema, and she came on with it all fastened with safety pins. She was wearing very little else apart from the normal underwear, but she came in. So part of the presentation was about making the point about what wonderful things NVivo could do, to fix a coding schema, to make sets and to merge codes and all those things that these softwares do or can help you to rationalize and unpick some of the over detailed stuff you've generated. So it was all, she was a very constructive illustration of what can go wrong. But I think back to that presentation now, and
I
think,
remember it.
how can I have asked her to do that? I'm not sure whether it was her suggestion actually or my suggestion, but
you wouldn't have let her do it if she didn't want to do it. It was
great fun. I certainly wouldn't have forced her to do it, but thank you, Celia. You were great. You were a great sport, and it was memorable.
Yeah, there must be photos of it somewhere.
Well, I'm rather glad that there isn't.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. But it does raise the issue of or emphasize how important it is that new researchers and new software users get the kind of scaffolding of the framework of the software and how it all sits together.
Absolutely.
Because it's very, very easy, and we see it over and over again, don't we? It's very, very easy technically to code. But what coding is methodologically is a different thing, and how to do that within a software program is influenced by what the software can help you do with those codes later on. And if you don't have that framework, so for me, I think that's one of the really important things that we've done over the years, not just through the events and stuff we've done, but the stuff we've written and the book and stuff is, and what so many other people are our colleagues are doing still now, and how still that's so much needed, all these years later, that we still have.
How interesting.
I still have people coming who've done. I don't think I've ever seen it in the way that you've just described, but I have seen what Christy Jackson would call a viral coding scheme, when you're trying to.
That's a good description.
Yeah, when you're duplicating things because you're trying to represent how concepts are related to one another in terms of how they're structured hierarchically, and that's not how a coding scheme works in software. There are other places, aren't there, where you explore and represent the connections between codes or concepts or themes, whatever they are representing. But the list is just a list of stuff.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think there's still so much need for that understanding.
Yes, it's the wanting to write up in the coding schema, write up your project in the coding schema. It just doesn't work, does it? It doesn't usually.
But we've all done it, because when I did my master's,
absolutely, yes,
I did. So my master's was comparing the learning experiences of young people in two countries, and I had the Netherlands and everything hanging underneath there, and then I had UK and everything hanging underneath there. So it's the same idea. It's just two, not more.
No,
but
not
exactly the same.
Yes,
exactly
yes.
the same.
And of course, one of the major advances that I think probably NVivo started off was the ability to code, just have one code for, let's say, tension or whatever, and be able to later on, subdivide it or produce a crosstab or a matrix of results across your different groups. I'm being quite structural here, but I think that was quite a major step forward. And
the live node browser, it was called back in the day, wasn't it?
Was it?
The fact that you could open up a code and then continue working within it. Yeah. So I mentioned the book earlier.
Oh yes. Which one? There've been so many.
There's only been two.
Well, there's researching social life as well.
Oh, researching, yeah, but we didn't write the whole book. That was just chapters within a book. So our actual book,
yes,
of which the third edition is coming on strong.
Well done. Well done.
But so the first edition I kind of muscled in on because you already had a contract with Sage, and
I was desperate, Christina. You didn't muscle in. I begged you. I begged you to join me.
What was the idea of it, though? Like the conception, because it was your idea, that there needed to be a textbook, and what it was. I think maybe it ended up being something a little bit different from what you might have conceived it to be at the beginning. I don't know, but what was the original idea? Because you'd already started writing it before I became involved.
Yeah, I can't remember how it came into being. Actually, I think Sage actually got in touch and suggested something at one of the conferences. I think by the time I started to write that book, I knew I'd come across so many of those issues that we've just been talking about that I felt I had something to say on the subject. I don't think I quite understood the awfulness of writing a book and how long it can take and how such hard work. And I think it got a whole lot better when you joined, and I can remember us, you came to stay, didn't you? And we used to sit underneath the stoop outside, or just sit in the office in our pajamas all day, working on it day after day. And I expect we got really smelly as well. Working so hard, but that was really, it was so great. Made such a difference working with somebody else.
I don't think we'd have ever got that first edition done if we hadn't have done that.
No, I don't think so.
I look back really fondly. I think it was hard work, but I also have lots of fond memories of it.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the rose-tinted glasses of nostalgia. But
it was such hard work, wasn't it? And everybody who's written a thesis or written a book will know exactly what we mean. But the thing about that book was it was very technical. There was an awful lot of technical screenshots that needed to be put in, a lot of annotations to the screenshots. We're constantly explaining things. We had lots of boxes, with case studies, and it was quite a complex structure for a book, wasn't it?
It was a bit like our handouts on steroids, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. So it wasn't just, a walk in the park like some books are, where you just start at the beginning and you finish at the end. Well, I'm exaggerating, obviously. No books are a walk in the park, but it was a very complex book, wasn't it?
Yeah. And some of the software programs decided to come out with a new version after we'd done the last screen.
So that was unbearable. It was really unbearable. So screenshots had to be changed, and then at the end we had to provide some sort of a website, which
I don't think we did a website for the first version.
For the second
second version was more, we took out some of the really detailed technical step-by-step stuff and put that on the website, and we had the developers help us with that, didn't we?
Yes, we did. That was great.
Which was great. But then the sort of the exercise bits in the textbook were more research process based. So getting them through our case, we had those case studies. Yes, we're still using the same ones now, and we've got another additional one. But I enjoyed, that's what I love most is still now, when someone comes to me and says, "Oh, I've got this project and I need to be able to do this,"
Yeah.
how can I do it?
It's lovely,
I love
isn't it?
doing that.
It's lovely. Yeah.
I love that
Yeah.
more than anything else, I
Yes,
think.
because you really feel you're opening up the possibilities for them, don't you?
Yeah.
Because, you know, they're so deep in it, they can't quite see their way out. But because you're floating around on the surface, you can see how it can all be brought together.
And you learn
using the
so much.
software. Yes.
Like you learn loads about whatever their topic is.
Yes, quite.
And
Yes.
also their method. I mean, I've learned so much about different analytic methods through those sorts of projects. But also about the software, because, you know, there's so much you can still learn about the software all the time, because somebody wants to do something particular, and then you've got to take a tool that the software's got and do something different with it than what it might have been designed for, and sort of manipulate it. And I love that. I love doing that. We've talked a bit about the history and all of those things, and I was just wondering, you know, you've mentioned quite a few people along the way, but I was just wondering about sort of key people in terms of your sort of career and trajectory in the CAQDAS field. Who are some of those? I mean, there's probably loads, aren't there? But who are some of those key people that stand out for you?
I think obviously Ray Lee and Nigel Fielding are the two principal people for me, because I wouldn't have entered the field at all. I would still be doing something completely different. Not in academia either, possibly. And they introduced me to a lot of interesting people, not necessarily in person, but to their thoughts and their work. Renata Tesh, for instance, and her work, somehow joining up and rationalizing methodologies with the idea of software and what software could do. That was a wonderful piece of categorization, which I think is probably still useful today. And then there were the software developers who are key. I mean, I think my work was very much practically based. It wasn't so theoretical as it should have been, maybe. But the software developers used to come along to present their new versions, and we'd always invite loads of people. So, you know, people like Tom Richards and particularly Lynn Richards, who introduced Nudist and NVivo to the world. They were so generous with their time, and just Lynn was such an accomplished researcher, that she was great in my life, in the CAQDAS Networking Project. And Udo Cookarts and Anne Cookarts of Max QDA. Max QDA was the most fantastic, calling it simple is not right, but it was so intuitively arranged and straightforward and colourful, and it's never really, in all its versions, it's always hung on to that intuitive. So I would say they were responsible for a lot of my joy in learning about CAQDAS and teaching it. Thomas Muir, obviously, about this TI, he was a great character and had a great software. And I think some of his tools were groundbreaking, really groundbreaking, and they opened my eyes to what was possible in software. So yes, but people like Christy Jackson, who I met, all over the place, and Silvana de Gregorio and Claire Tagg, and the names just go on and on. They had such lovely relationships with all of them, and I learned from everyone. But Ray and Nigel were, my principal influences, and had a really nice relationship with them, because they could have been very bossy and very controlling, and
they were hands off, weren't they?
They were so hands off.
But also, when you needed something or you didn't understand something, they always had something
always
to say.
there.
Yeah, always helpful. Yeah.
And they were right at the top of the game. Of course, they'd been through all the, they were disciplined academics. They knew what was what. They knew what was the right way to do things. Their language was wonderful. I can always remember continually getting great pleasure in teasing Ray about our use of the word softwares. Do you remember?
Yeah.
Softwares in the plural.
Yeah. He always used to put a red cross through.
Yes, he would always correct us and say there's no such concept as softwares. They're software programs or software packages. But so sometimes it was quite a joy to deliberately get things wrong. And for goodness sake, we were part-time. We didn't have time to get all the words in the right order, did we? So, but they were wonderful, because even right at the beginning, they didn't say do this, do that. By March, 1995, you need to have done this. But just occasionally they would say, maybe you should think about running some courses. Gulp.
So how long did it take then from when you started before you did your first course?
I think it might have been about 6-7 months. I think I was busy setting up a helpline.
Yeah.
Not that I was in any position to help people very much, but I was learning the softwares, obviously, learning how to use email was so new to me. I didn't even know what an email was when I joined. So there was such a lot to learn. And I think we held a lot of free seminars in London. We used to use a medical research council building in Bedford Square.
Yeah, I remember doing that.
We used to invite all sorts of methodologists and software developers to Bedford Square and do these free seminars. Sorry to keep using the word free, but to differentiate between our free events and the ones we charged a bit of money for.
Yeah. But that was the luxury of having funding, right? So we had funding until 2010, I think, was when the funding, when we had, and so in those days from 94 to 2010, we had money that we could put on those events, and we could invite people.
No, it was great. Yeah. But it really was a shoestring project, and I used to do pretty much everything. I mean, I can remember going up to London, with shopping bags full of coffee and tea and biscuits, and then at the end of it, I'd have to do the washing up and then go home. So sometimes I did the refreshments for the training courses later on, and did the washing up. Although we did have some wonderful help from Carol and Maureen, and Liz, didn't we? And Liz. That was real luxury, wasn't it, when we started to get a bit of help on the admin side? Yeah, definitely. That was great.
Definitely. So what are you most proud of? If I had to put you on the spot and say, what are you most proud of in terms of CAQDAS, the project, or your involvement in it?
Well, I think the book is one. I think I'm proud of the way, well, first of all, me on my own, I really got it up and running and was running a vigorous set of workshops by the time you joined. And then it got even more vigorous and much better. And you've taken the project places I could never have dreamt of. So I think there's been a big change since you took it over. But I am terribly proud of the way it just ballooned into this project that people came from. They came from abroad to do the courses, and it was just, I'm not saying they went away completely satisfied every time,
but they did. But our feedback was always really your feedback, and they were.
Well, I like to think it was, but I'm sure there were occasional, problems. But I was terrifically proud of the way that got going. And in a way, it was demand that sort of you know, helped me to move at that speed. So yes,
you mean the pressure of people wanting courses?
Yes.
So
yes.
did people get in touch and say we want to?
Yes. And at that stage, I was doing everything. I was doing the application procedures. I was advertising. You know, then passing it on for invoicing, and you know that all the admin and you know everything was it was a shoestring job to start with, and I think I'm proud of how I got it going. Yeah, definitely. I think later on, I began to feel much as I became much more knowledgeable about the software, and I felt you know, I was pretty much in control of what I knew and how I would teach it. I started, and I'm much more confident about helping people with their projects. I think I was quite proud of how I consulted on projects and you know made sense of things for them. So all of that was a really satisfying. And I did a lot of traveling around, but I'm most proud of the project itself and the fact that it was, you know, born from Ray and Nigel's initial inspiration, and I took it forward.
You made it happen.
I made it happen.
Yeah, you did.
I couldn't have done it without Ray and Nigel. You know, I couldn't have done it without them. But I was pretty much left on my own, which I was grateful for. And actually, I think what a talent that was to be so. I think they were very careful not to interfere too much, and I was very grateful for that. I think because it made me feel as though I was in control, and I think that was good.
Well, I'm sure they knew and saw in you that you were more than capable of doing that, and that's what it needed.
It was very trusting. It was very trusting.
Well, they made a good call, I guess.
Of course.
All right then. So you mentioned the AI.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that then?
Well, I've been sort of peripherally watching it all going on. I haven't sat in on your symposium yet, but I must. I've been listening to Susanna Fries talking about it on her posts on LinkedIn. I guess I'm worried about it in the way that everybody's worried about AI at the moment. I think because it's a bit of an unknown quantity, I'm worried about confidentiality with AI, and you know how somehow that might not be a controllable thing. We've always been a bit suspicious, haven't we? Historically, I mean, I'm going back to people using AI as a shortcut to careful thought.
Using software generally, you mean?
Using software. Well, yes, but particularly those softwares that started to do the thinking for you. We tried to be open-minded about it, but we were a little bit anxious that a naive or someone looking for a shortcut might not use the software in the best way, or might abuse. I mean, the most extreme aspect of what we've seen over the years is people wanting to pay us to write their theses for them.
Oh yeah,
and
how
do
many
their
emails
research.
have you had?
I mean, you know, there's so much effort put into taking the easy way out. Well, there isn't, obviously only there's quite a few people compared to the great body of people doing it properly, but that it does make me anxious. That I suppose it's because it hasn't really been put to the test yet, not properly. Or do you think it has? What do you think?
Oh, I think it's a contested area. I think there's different groups. There's a whole bunch of researchers who are very, very concerned about it, not just in terms of how you're talking about it, but the ethics of the development of the models in the first place, and all of that kind of thing. Then there's obviously lots of adopters of AI who are using it, some of who are thinking critically about how they're using it and why they're using it and when they're using it. And I think some of the ways in which generative AI has been embedded in some of the CAQDAS programs is quite thoughtful methodologically, but not always. But I think, we always said right from the beginning, didn't we? The software doesn't do this analysis for you. You're doing the analysis.
No.
And when I was doing the podcast, the very first podcast that I did with Nigel and Ray, we were chatting after we'd finished recording, and Ray said, he won't mind me saying this, I don't think, but he said, maybe that statement's something that we're not going to be able to say in the same way anymore, right? Because now you can have the AI do things for you. And my main concern is what I'm now calling qualitative deep fake, which is the idea that the whole of the qualitative research cycle can be theoretically done using AI, and what that does to the professionalism of research in different sectors, not just academia, but government research. Research is happening in all kinds of different places, but how potentially not only can a whole project be done with very minimal human intervention, but then the output can then be part of a subsequent project that looks at it. So I think there are lots and lots of issues, but I also think I see my role as raising awareness about what it actually does. And, I'm kind of quite pragmatic about the fact that people are going to be using it. So therefore, I see my role as equipping them to be able to use it in appropriate ways. So, but I think that what that means is well, contested and contingent on a whole number of things. So it's very different doing a qualitative project, market research project, for example, when you can see the application very clearly, right? That's very different from a very in-depth ethnographic project looking at the lived experiences of people. So I don't think it's a one, it's like everything, it's not a one size fits all response to AI in qualitative analysis. And I think the work that I've been doing with, I was telling you earlier, so we're doing this keynote with Steve Wright at the SRA conference in a couple of weeks. And we've got this graph, which is to do with the kind of the hype of AI and, and how that kind of plateaus and, the trough of disillusionment, I think he calls it. And so we've been talking about where we are at on that graph. And I think I've become more concerned about it rather than less the more I've delved into it. But that's not to say that there aren't some very, very useful tools out there. And I think, just talking about AI and qualitative research masks a huge amount of variety in terms of what's possible and how it's being used.
You sort of have to trust academia to do its work and get things right about it. But it seems to me that I mean, I'm sounding very pessimistic now, but in my position as a grandparent now, I feel rather pessimistic about the role of IT and social media in particular on people's lives. And I think, our grandchildren just take it for granted. It's it's not only the backdrop to their lives, it's almost a major plank of their, it's how their lives are conducted almost.
Well, they don't know anything else, do they?
No, it is the environment in which they live in, and the more this happens, the more we, as it were, seem to lose control over the uses of it and who is abusing it, and I think that's going to happen with AI just as much, if not more so. I mean, quite horrific abuses. And I with that general election coming up, I think how much is that going to be affected by AI? And we've seen how democracy has been affected by social media and its abuses, and and the silos of information that go at, that people get trapped in. I just feel a bit pessimistic about the whole thing. But, I know we have to be constructive and positive and, look forward, but I am a bit pessimistic.
All right. Let's move on to my final two questions that are coming. So one of them's about the past and one of them's about the future. So first things first, if you had to pinpoint one moment in the CAQDAS history that had changed the course of qualitative analysis using computers, what would that be?
Well, I've been thinking about this a bit today, and it's really quite a difficult question, but I think I'm going to hone in on a particular software and a particular tool or a particular way of being able to treat data. And I think it started off in a particular software, but has become a bit more widespread in other softwares now, and that was the can't remember the quotation tool in Atlas TI.
Okay. So you mean the fact that you can create a segment of data that's independent of anything else?
Okay. That's right. I mean, you could do it in any software, actually. You can just create quotations of interest to you and code them, with an interesting code, and then review all those interesting quotations afterwards. But it was a central piece of the architecture of Atlas TI, that quotation structure. You had to have the quotation in order to be able to code it, really. And it was the ability to link those quotations, within a file in different orders, irrespective of codes. And I think that opened up the possibility of software, and it made me think about how to mimic that in some ways in other softwares. And so, you could mimic that to a certain extent in other softwares, and other softwares gradually took on some similar types of characteristics. But I do think that was quite a moment, and yet it wasn't a moment for Atlas TI. They started off with that structure, but I think it was my realization of how it freed me from the coding restraints.
And it's one of the reasons why, so back in the day, there were those, some of those critics who were talking about how the rise of qualitative software kind of homogenized methods in terms of coding, right? And everyone's going to do coding, and qualitative analysis is all about coding, and that's a really good example of how that isn't actually the case. Okay, interesting. All right, let's look to the future then. What's one thing that you think still needs to happen in the field to further advance methodology?
I don't know. I really am not sure. I think control of AI would be a good thing, and making it useful but contained. It's not going to happen. I'm really not sure. I think I'm a bit far away from latest developments, really, to be able to answer that question properly. I'd like to think that people continue to, as it were, keep software and methodology apart, because we always did teach, didn't we, that the software's not going to give you a methodology. Maybe that's going to change with AI. I'm not sure. I wouldn't like to see that. What I want to see, what we've always wanted, is that people see the software as the management tool, as a data management tool, I think the problem that people have always had is not really being sure about what their methodology is, and how to make it work within the software. So, maybe I don't know. I don't know, but it would be along those lines of helping people to understand how to use the software in different methodological contexts. But I don't know how to arrive at that.
I think there's still work to be done there, isn't there?
Yeah.
All right, plenty for me to do in the future then.
Okay.
Thank you.
Be nice to see you again.
It has. Thank you.
Okay.